Colleagues, we're having an interesting discussion this morning, and it's interesting that a number of the speakers have referenced the State Debt Policy Advisory Commission report, and I can assure you I have read it inside and out. It's also interesting to me that at least two of the speakers, in regards to lottery, or whether or not lottery bonding is appropriate at this time, failed to mention that the true capacity to issue lottery bonds is based primarily on prudent management and sound fiscal practice. Comes from the book, not from me, comes from the book. But nobody has said that yet today. Nobody is standing up for Oregonians saying, we sent you here to pay particularly close attention to the dollars we send you and the way you use them. And I am sure indebtedness ranks high with them. I'm going to read a section here from this book. The Oregon Constitution requires the Legislative Assembly to appropriate unobligated net lottery proceeds or revenues to first repay lottery bonds before appropriating the proceeds for any other purpose. So what are the purposes? Well, once lottery-backed debt service is paid, that's number one. By the way, 25% of every dollar into lottery goes to debt service. That's the first obligation. Once lottery-backed debt is paid each year, the remaining state lottery funds are distributed to the Education Stability Fund. Everybody clearly hear that? To the Education Stability Fund, the Parks and Natural Resources Fund as required by the Constitution, and then allocated and applied to certain economic development and educational purposes. So how much will we take away from the Education Stability Fund when we continue to borrow and obligate the proceeds, unobligated proceeds of lottery funds when we do this again? Well, let's answer that. The Education Stability Fund and the Parks and Natural Resource Fund are allocated 18% and 15% respectively of unobligated net proceeds. So, the more we obligate ourselves to debt, the less we put into those two funds. So you got to think to yourself, do we want to take away from that Education Stability Fund? Pretty important. Do we want to take away from our ability to do other economic development projects as may be prescribed in lottery? Or do we want to obligate ourselves to debt for which I believe we are currently exceeding the limitation? So let's talk about what is the limitation for debt using prudent management and sound fiscal position. Let's talk about that. The Commission's lottery bond capacity policy is that existing and proposed lottery debt service not exceed 4 times coverage or no more than 25% of net unobligated lottery revenue. Now, we've had two other speakers reference the book and talk about what is that. And I'm grateful to the speaker from Clackamas County because he actually pointed out a second place, which he didn't mention, but it's on page 3, where the book clearly lays out the fact that 2012 and 2013, when you look at annual amount of additional debt that may be issued and remain within authorized debt coverage ratios, is blank. It is 0. It is none. The Commission who wrote the report didn't put we might have $50 million in here. They didn't put we might have $30 million in here. They put 0. That's on page 36 of the book. Take a peek. It's also on page 3 of the book, which says, we said no. The question here this morning is, do we go beyond that? How much more do we do? The speaker from Central Lane and Lynn counties talked about some of the capacity issues and whether or not we were up or down, and used some semantics, but let me read directly from the book. Given the substantial reduction in lottery projected revenue, Given the substantial reduction in lottery projected revenue,
Yeah.
Or how about using the Treasurer's own letter, which has been referenced?
Representative Lingard yields.
Thank you, Representative. Which we heard a little bit different take on. But the Treasurer's letter of February 17th says, my staff has updated lottery debt capacity using the latest lottery revenue forecast. So let's see, what did I just read? Given the substantial reduction in lottery projected revenue, then take the letter from the Treasurer which says, although it dropped by another 1.9% over the 6-year horizon, you can't find a place in this book that will tell you lottery revenue is on the rise. And colleagues, I'm here to tell you that that debt capacity we are exceeding today. We don't have to borrow a penny more in lottery, and we will further exceed it if revenue falls. You can all do that math, right? You don't have to borrow one more dime in lottery funding. If lottery revenue continues to fall, the capacity to borrow money shrinks and pushes us further beyond the limitation. In addition to that, there are other capacity issues. So I've talked about the issue of what's lottery revenue doing. It's clearly stated in the book. But there's also other capacity considerations and other restrictions possible. Given the state's use of lottery bonds to promote economic development activities that do not always fit into the federal government's tax rules with regard to qualified private activity, so we do both taxable and non-taxable bonding, issuance of lottery debt on a taxable basis generally results in a higher overall interest rate than the tax-exempt rates we have assumed for our capacity calculations. Here's the key point. Assuming a blended taxable tax-exempt rate, and it lists the rates, but we'll let that go, the available overall capacity for 6 years would decrease. And we could go into all the numbers. I'm standing before you as a business person with a payroll and employees at home that I'm responsible to. I'm standing before you as someone who has brought jobs legislation to this body for which I am passionately working to make move. But I'm also standing before you on behalf of taxpayers who said to us when they elected us, I believe, to use that fiscal and prudent management. I would ask you to vote no on this minority report and give those voters and those taxpayers the confidence they should have in us to use their funds in that fiscally prudent manner.